panel the inaugural year, where several of them asked the question from the stage, can we come back? Well, I kind of thought they'd only show up one time and never want to come back. And many wonderful longtime friendships have developed since that first gathering of presidential descendants here. And I know, let's see, Marie was here the first year, Jamie was here the first year, Jill was here the first year, and Jenny, they were all here the first year, and have missed very few since that time. And this year, I want to begin by saying, before we get into the panel, Richard Gatchell is unable to be here this year, who's been a regular festival attendee from President Monroe's family. And the Cherry Blossom Festival pauses today to remember the Monroe family and the passing of Dick Gatchell Sr., Richard Gatchell's father, who was a longtime festival guest. But this has become a special group with a special bond, and to bring all of their stories to the front is our good moderator and friend, Larry Cook. If you'll put your hands together for Larry.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Massey and Jenny, you got some competition here. You know? Wow. That was great. Thank you again, James. Thank you. We are going to get right into this because we are running a little bit behind schedule. And I just want to say again, thank you, Nick, for allowing me to moderate this panel. It means a lot to me. I love moderating this panel. And again, I'll say it, I say it every year, it's like hitting the history lottery for a historian. So I thank you. Before we do start, I want to give Nicholas again a big hand for coordinating this. And I've heard so many people already talk about next year, so I know starting Monday you'll be on next year's. So let's just quickly go down the line. I know most people know who you are, but let's just quickly go down the line with your name and how you're related, starting with Ulysses.
So, Ulysses, I'm a little hoarse from talking. Ulysses Grant Dietz, great-great-grandson of Ulysses and Julia Grant.
Jenny Harville, great-granddaughter of President Calvin Coolidge and Grace Coolidge.
I'm Katie Rawls, and I am the great-niece of Richard Nixon.
I'm Jill Campbell. I am the first cousin, 4 or 5 times removed, I'm not sure how it is, of James K. Polk.
I'm James Carter. I am the grandson of Jimmy and Rosalind Carter.
Not a third James. I'm James Auchincloss, half-brother-in-law of John F. Kennedy.
Leanne Smith, niece of Jimmy and Rosalind Carter.
I'm Marie Clinton Bruno. I am first cousin once removed to President Bill Clinton. His only descendant is a young mother, absolutely wonderful with 3 young children. So maybe someday she'll get here. We're sharing.
Oh, okay.
They get that one.
I'm the daffy granddaughter of Dwight Eisenhower and Mamie Eisenhower. Mary Jean.
Massey McKinley, great-great-nephew of William and Ida Saxton McKinley.
Clifton Truman Daniel, grandson of Harry and Bess Truman.
Wow. Where else do you go and see all these different administrations represented? Only here in Marshfield. So I'm going to throw out some questions here, and if you want to answer the question, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. As I can't promise it'll be the first hand that goes up, but as I see you, I'll call on you. So I love the personal side of the presidency. That's what I do. And so I'm interested in knowing what personal quality helped to get your relative to be president of the United States. And what I mean by that is, do you think it was his charm, his good looks, luck, whatever you happen to think? But what personal quality do you think helped to get him there? Go ahead, Mary.
I can say it in one word.
Okay.
Strength.
Nice.
Maybe 2, integrity.
Nice. Clifton?
Reluctance.
Yeah.
He didn't want the job, and they loved him for it. No, he was a compromise candidate. He was, and sometimes think that maybe we should choose more of our presidents that way. The ones that don't want the job, just pick a good one and throw them in there.
Good point. Marie, were you next? Go ahead.
Whoever.
Go ahead, and then I'll go right down the line.
A demonstrated concern for others, beginning with my Aunt Virginia's father. She grew up outside of Hope in Bodcaw, who had a general store. And the president was there when he was very young and watched how his grandfather treated all the customers, black, white, rich, poor, no matter what, the same and equal. And he learned that not everybody had the good fortune and was committed from that point and all the way to do public service and had a demonstrated record by the time he ran for president.
Nice. Leanne?
I think the word I'd choose for Uncle Jimmy is compassion and his understanding that the concern and suffering or misfortunes of others, through whether it was helping them have better housing, treating everybody equally, believing that every day you wake up and you love the people around you and that you promote peace in the world in whatever way it is in all of those different areas. So I think, he had a true understanding of compassion and love for others.
Thank you. Jamie?
Well, you brought up the word. I wasn't going to use it, looks, in his case. But something that you wouldn't have known about before he was elected, because it's a dangerous quality, humor. If you're too funny as a candidate, they don't take you seriously. You rarely remembered President Kennedy saying a declarative sentence. Everything he said, at least in my household, was a question. So the quality he valued the most was curiosity. That's how you learn something.
Nice. James, and this is great. We get two Carter perspectives.
Yeah, I agree 100%, but I'd also like to add integrity, which was very important in that election cycle. So,
absolutely.
Well, I think mine would be, it's appropriate on First Lady's Day, would be his wife, Sarah. I think she was the driving force behind him, and it's something she really wanted for him, was to become president. So I think that was his cattle prod behind him, pushing him into it.
I'm so glad you said that, because I talk about that all the time with Sarah Polk. I think she loved it more than James.
I think so too.
Anybody else here want to answer that question? You want to?
Determination. My great-grandparents were very poor, but very committed to the religion of Quaker, and they had a huge capacity for hard work. And my great-uncle, my grandfather, and my other uncles learned that right off the bat, and he was not afraid of hard work, and he had a great capacity for it.
Just U.S. Grant had great personal integrity and refusing to back down.
So I guess for Coolidge, he finished up Harding's term when Harding passed away, so that would be fate. And then he was elected in his own right, and I think people just really liked him. They considered him the boy next door, and very friendly, and he worked across the aisle. He was bipartisan, so yeah, that's my answer.
Wow, and that is great, because I'm sitting here just in awe, because I got an answer from every single one of you with that. And that just says something about how you feel about your family members, and you know what that quality is, and that's great. And thank you for providing an answer to that. I'm kind of sticking with the personal side of the presidency here on the second question, but how would you describe your relative as far as personality, traits, interests, likes, dislikes, from personal knowledge, family history, or just your perception? And the reason I'm wording that in that way, what I mean is we read so much in history books and now online, it's really hard to tell what somebody is really like. What are they really like? I mean, we talked about that a little bit today at the Rosalind Carter luncheon, with Rosalind being Steel Magnolia, and then how she is in person. You know, so kind of along those same lines, and some of you have direct personal knowledge of that because you actually were there with them, and others have family knowledge of that. So just give us an idea of what your president relative was like on a personal basis. You all answered before. Who wants to start? Ulysses, you want to start?
I mean, obviously I didn't know U.S. Grant personally, but he had this incredible, it's one of the sort of complexities of his whole time in office, that he had this incredible yearning to bring justice to people even when he couldn't. And that's something, that sort of striving for that even in the face of overwhelming lack of support from everybody around him, I think is something that I've always thought most admirable. And this, the drive to get something done no matter the circumstances he himself was in.
You know, I just want to add to yours a little bit from your presentation, which I enjoyed very much today, where you had mentioned about how he cried at that one point at his daughter's wedding. And we of course don't think of General Grant, the tough Civil War general, as crying. But again, he brought that out today. I love that from a personal nature. It tells us about that man from history, that he had that sensitive side. And that's exactly what I'm getting at here. Who'd like to go next?
I'll
Go ahead, Jenny.
So I'm going to use descriptors again. Wit, frugality, humility, civility, and those are the four that come to mind off the top of my head.
He wasn't really as silent as people.
No, he
as
wasn't.
people
So
portrayed
he
him to
did
be,
not
right?
make small talk. He would not initiate small talk. But
We're talking about Calvin Coolidge here.
Coolidge, by the way. But if you started a conversation with him, he would engage. So, yeah.
Who'd like to go next? Jamie?
Well, somewhat on the negative side, if you asked President Kennedy how he was, he hated that question because he didn't want to start the morning off with a lie. He had poor health, manifestly disguised, and he was his father's son. His father's motto or saying was, "It's not who you are that counts, it's what people think you are." Now, this is an attribute, cancer, that has grown since the politics of 1960 for the last 65 years, and I wish the country could get away from it.
Well, you know, that, again, this is why I like that question, because we've got a young, very youthful John F. Kennedy who looks like he could do anything, but really had a lot of health problems. So, you know, again, that was the real JFK. Thank you. Who is next, Leanne?
I continue to go back to love, loving everyone, peace, creating that need for everybody to have the housing and the, you know, working overseas with the elections for fair elections for all people, everybody being equal, the faith that they lived and showed throughout the world, and just that everyday waking up saying, be kind to everyone.
And I just wanted to comment on that one because obviously, as we know, we were close friends with them for 20 years, and President Carter, when he was ready to go, he was a man on time, and when he was ready to go, he was ready to go, and so he liked to keep his schedule and keep things moving along.
He did, and even like at Christmas, when they would show up at Christmas, when they came to Plains, it was like, you know, their time away from the spotlight. And I can remember coming in for Christmas and eating, and then when it was time to go, Aunt Rosalind would come in the kitchen to help us wash dishes. And he would come and do it, Rosalind, it's time to go. you know. And it was just not to get away from us, but to get back to that little sanctuary of their world that they could shut out everything and just be with their immediate family. And, you know, we respected that. We understood. So, yeah, he was all about time.
Yeah, I used to think about that years ago, and here I'm running to keep up with this 90-year-old former president that's ready to go. James, go ahead.
Yeah, I
Add
think
to that.
that was part of his like military training that stuck with him, and his being an engineer. It was all like detailed. This is what happens in this block of time. This is what happens in that block. On vacations, we had pages-long itineraries down to 5-minute. You know, so we would leave at 7:05 for this, and we would be at this place until 8:15, and then leave at 8:20, and then and if you weren't there, you would get left. So, so we had these, yeah. So we towards when some of us got older and started to have some say in these schedules, we would always block off a day where we didn't have a schedule. This would be like free day, which was unheard of when I was a child, but towards the end, we used to get a free day on vacation where we could vacation, and so that's
Very nice. Marie.
Just briefly, he's never been a stranger. My first memory of him was 7. That's the earliest, and I've never really thought about that until you get thrown into all this and people ask you questions. He's just constantly thinking of what else can he do and how can he, I remember he was named Time's Man of the Year. I think it was the year after he left office or the year after. And I said, hey, that's pretty cool. And he said, yeah, and I can't do a damn thing with it. But he's got his Clinton Global Initiative. He's got the Alliance for Healthier Generation. I think in the thread of what I'm hearing of a lot of the presidents, most all of them, is public service and always looking for a way to do things better with the as he'll say, the blessings he's been given. He's never been a stranger. I see people that I know have said in private, hate his guts. I've heard him say it just whatever you want to feel. And when they're next to him, they melt like butter. So,
Exactly. I love
he's
the
a
fact
great
that you
guy.
said he never met a stranger, because I've had the honor to meet President Clinton 6 or 7 times. And I think every time after the first time he acted like he knew me. And I knew he didn't remember me. But he certainly acted like it, and a lot of charisma there, and very nice guy. Mary.
Clinton actually had a photographic memory, and
Yes, he
he
does.
would remember you if he saw you again. He would remember
if you
your
gave
name.
him
and-
your phone
yeah.
number, he'll remember it. Hey, do you remember that Larry Cook guy? Yeah, it's his number 8024. Anyway, so-
She just gave my phone number out.
Oh.
folks. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Mary, go ahead.
Well, Granddad had an enormous capability of being multifaceted. When he was coming home from the office, that was how we referred to it. I wasn't thinking the Oval Office, but, it was at the peak of the Cold War, and, he'd come home, and when he was with us, he was a knee-slapping grandfather. That's, just what he did. And he, including getting on the floor with us and things like that. I mean, he was just, and he had a laugh that went from the back of his big toe all the way up. And, but when he was angry or when he was upset or whatever, you cleared the room. So, I mean, it was really kind of, and when I think back on it now as an adult, I'm thinking, well, I think he was a little bit on the stress side, but even when he was in the hospital dying, we would go in to see him and he'd say, how's your weight coming along? Because he'd know that, I was trying to lose weight or whatever, and it was anything but about him. It was always about others. And that includes even his military service, and he decided that the way to achieve peace was to start getting people together directly outside of governments. And he said, the people want peace. They want peace so badly that the governments are going to have to get out of the way and let them have it. And he started people to people, which I spent 25 years continuing or whatever. And I saw his philosophy work every day. The problem is that doesn't make the headlines, you know. But I always admired his ability to adapt to any circumstance.
That is so cool. I mean, the presidential nerd in me is just, my head is going crazy every time I talk to you guys. But I mean, who envisioned President Eisenhower down on the floor playing with his grandchildren? I mean, you just don't think of it that way.
He also kept green elephant piggy banks for us, and he would divide his change at the end of the day 4 ways, and at the end of the year we had to count it, and whatever we were off, if we were off $1, he'd take it away, or if we were off 5 cents or whatever, and then the rest went into our college fund.
Wow, I think that military training was coming into him too, just like with James here with
Right, you have
with
to
his
own it.
grandfather. Massey, I know you want to say something about President McKinley.
Yeah, William McKinley, first and foremost, had impeccable integrity. And I think that integrity came from his service in the Civil War. He was the last Civil War president to serve. And I think from the tutelage of Rutherford B. Hayes and U.S. Grant and their influence on his life as a young private, he rose to the rank of major as the war came to an end. And I definitely think that his leadership skills came from that military service. Also, William was a very devout and reverent man. His mother, Nancy, was a devout Methodist. He was raised in the Methodist church there in Ohio, and always had daily prayer in his life. He and Ida sat next to each other and had daily prayer together. But the most awe-inspiring thing I think of anything that I can think about William McKinley was he had a heart of forgiveness. Because when William McKinley was assassinated in Buffalo, he looked down, after he'd been assassinated. The bullet was in his abdomen, and the Secret Service, the Pinkerton Agency, whoever it was at the time, wrestled this assassin to the ground, and he said, "Please don't hurt him." And to me, he's thinking more about that person than his personal, pain of actually being assassinated. So I think that's probably the best thing I think McKinley ever possessed, was that compassion and that forgiveness.
And I just want to add to that compassion spread into his marriage. I mean, if you looked up perfect husband in the dictionary, I think William McKinley's picture would be there, with the compassion that he had for his wife and her epilepsy, and they changed protocol at the White House so that she could sit next to him in case she had a seizure. So yeah, you nailed it with President McKinley. Clifton, I know we can envision your grandfather playing on maybe not down on the floor, but playing with his grandchildren, because there's a really famous picture of you. I think you're on a rocking horse and with your grandfather there next to you. So,
Well, he was mean that time. He was. I had a rocking horse. It had springs at the knees, and you could ride it up and down and side to side. Not a rocking horse, one of those things on springs. You could kill yourself, which is what my mother was always telling me. And she wasn't there one morning. It was Grandpa behind the newspaper reading. Architect of the Marshall Plan, the end of the war, the Truman Doctrine, terrible babysitter. Just really, really bad, paying no attention to me whatsoever. As I rode that thing, I bounced it off the floor, and it landed wrong, and I went flying, and my grandmother was in the kitchen. She heard the crash. She came running out, and she went to scoop me up, and of course I burst into tears, because that's good for a hug or a glass of milk or a cookie or what have you. And she almost had me when a voice from across the room said, "Stop right there, don't you touch him." And I looked up to see who'd ruined this for me. And he's glaring at me over the top of his newspaper. And he said, "You're not hurt. Quit crying." See, mean. I shut up immediately, though. And he said, get that contraption up, get back on it, and start riding it again. My grandmother helped me, and I got back on. She dusted me off, and she went back in the kitchen. He went back behind the newspaper, and I rode very carefully until I figured it was safe to get off and get the hell out of there. So, yeah, great.
Good times with the grandpa. I'm gonna skip to the fourth question, then go back to the third. We'll leave the third one last because I think it'll make a good finale. But I always like this question. I've given this question before. What has history gotten right and or wrong concerning your president relative? And just, briefly, something that you think, and it's, we gear all these panels toward a positive thing, but, so feel free to say, hey, history got this right. But what do you think maybe history got wrong? Either way.
Okay.
Go ahead, Katie.
My great uncle's foreign policy. This man knew all the names of the leaders and had relationships with them, including some of their fathers. He worked very hard to make sure that we had allies, and he formed a bunch of, bridges with different countries. And so I'd have to say his public policy was what they got right. He was very good with public policy.
Thank you. Ulysses, did you want to?
Well, I think as of right now, I think they've gotten most of U.S. Grant right. But when I was a kid, most of it was wrong or skewed. And it was all about broader political context in the shifting of the country at the end of the 19th century. So right now, as I say, it's a good time to be descended from U.S. Grant, where it wasn't when I was growing up. And I appreciate that. I would say that, there have been a lot of good books written, but Ron Chernow, I turned to him once and I said, you're the best friend U.S. Grant ever had since Mark Twain. And I don't agree with everything in his book, but I think he got it right in a way that hadn't been before.
You mentioned that somewhat in your presentation, and I loved it because I don't think there's been another president where there's been such a roller coaster ride on, getting it right, getting it wrong type of thing. So I'm glad it's straightening out. That's really, really great. Jenny, did you want to go?
I would just say the Silent Cal, title that people have given him. It's a misnomer, and he wasn't silent all the time. He gave more speeches on his own, that he wrote on his own to the press than anyone before, any president before or after. He gave, all of these press conferences, and so he was actually very verbose in his own way and eloquent. And then just the other part of that is I wanted to make sure that he's becoming more known overall and more recognized, because I'm still coming across people who, Calvin Coolidge? I've never heard of that person. Oh, he was president? When was he president? So there's still a lot of educating to do among everyone, and especially our young people.
Well, you're working good to get that done with that reenactor that you had, today's program. Everybody enjoyed that. Jill, did you have?
Well,
something?
I was going to say Jenny's doing a really good job of
Oh,
spreading her
sorry.
word. But mine really isn't kind of history adjacent. If you Google Polk County, Missouri, there will be sites that will say it was named after President Polk. It was not. That's a misnomer. It was actually named after President Polk's grandfather. President Polk was only Speaker of the House when Polk County, Missouri was named. So it was not named after the president, but there's wrong history out there, and we have done our best to try to get it corrected, but they still think it's named after the president.
Well, we're correcting it even further today.
And it wasn't.
so
It was
thank you.
named after his grandfather.
Thank you. James? James Carter first, and then James.
I've answered this one before, and I said it's just the thing they got wrong is like the focus of the attention to the hostage crisis. Everybody views it as a political thing. It was bad, it cost them the election, that kind of thing. But all of the hostages came home, and that's a victory. So.
And that's the victory that your grandfather wanted.
Right.
For them all to come home more than anything else. Jamie?
You switched the number of the questions, and so suddenly my mind had to figure out something I hadn't thought about. But it's probably the most unusual thing that maybe historians have gotten wrong about John Kennedy. I knew a very bright, of course, attractive lady who knew John Kennedy quite well. I don't want to explain too much about where that might be going, but she knew the other Kennedys, and she said, if I ever wrote a biography of your brother-in-law, I would call it John F. Kennedy, Only Child. Now, the term Kennedy family has probably been used more than the term Washington family, Lincoln family, Carter family. Everybody thinks of a Kennedy and then they think the word family, because currently somebody's running who has 29 siblings or 29 cousins, maybe one or two of whom are supporting him. So the more you got to know Jack Kennedy, you said, well, he's really not like any of the others. I'll have to come back next year to fully answer that question.
Okay, well, great answer, though. Thank you.
Yes.
Leanne?
The question's right or wrong, and then the word concerning. And I grew up in middle school with him running for president, and he was elected, and the inauguration was when I was 8th grade. And then I went through high school with the second part of him running. And not a lot of people can say that they could vote for their uncle the first time they ever got to vote, but I got to vote for him in the second election that he lost. But I heard throughout all of those years, that he wasn't the best president. And then as history has gone along, and you look at what he did post-presidency, then you just think, oh, wow. And that 4 years of his life doesn't equal to the rest of his life and all the accomplishments that he's made, and that the legacy that will just continue to go on and on and on. And so, it's more concerning for me than right or wrong. And because he's just been an amazing man and role model for all of us.
Thank you. Anybody that wants, right down the line. Marie, you're next. If you. Very good. Okay.
Y'all go ahead.
Mary, Massey, whoever wants to go.
That being the grandpa left office with still the lowest approval rating of any president in 1950, early 1953. So the first, when I knew him as grandpa, being Harry Truman's grandson was fun, but he was not thought of the way he is today. He always said that it took at least 20 years after a president has left office for you to figure out exactly what his presidency was like. And that seemed true. When he died in 1972, it was a couple of more years, and I was still at school. And one of the kids down the hall started yelling for me to come down and listen to a song on his stereo. And I'm like, okay. And I ran down to his room, and he cranked the volume up. It was the rock band Chicago singing America Needs You, Harry Truman. You're 17 years old, and you got hair down the middle of your back, and a rock band singing about your grandfather. It was very strange. But that's where things changed. So the history had a lot of things wrong prior to that, and they got a lot of it right since then.
Very good. Very nice. Thank you. We're going to.
I thought.
Oh, go ahead, Mary. Yes,
I wasn't
sorry.
going to say this, and this is the main thing I would love to. It's what you call fake news, and they've said it over and over and over enough that it's become history. But my grandfather did not have an affair with Kay Summersby. And first of all, it was a wartime situation, and even if they had intended to or whatever, they had no privacy, they had no place to go, and that kind of thing. It's been dispelled passionately. We, as a family, knew Kay Summersby. We met her. And my father was there the whole time and knew. But the problem is I guess she got sick, and she wrote a book about Granddad, and she herself said that she felt affection for him, but it was totally unrequited. And the scuttlebutt about if Granddad continued the relationship or whatever, the lie that came out, he was going to be busted out of the Army, and that was not what happened. What happened was MacArthur got his wife to the Pacific, and Granddad wanted to bring Mimi to Europe. And the answer was, you bring her to Europe, you know, there's no place for her, you bring her to Europe, and we'll bust you out of the Army. So when she wrote her book and she said that, and she herself said that there was nothing to it, but everybody just went bananas, and they even made movies of the love story, quote unquote. And it was deeply hurtful to my grandmother, but she trusted him and she knew him. And she basically said, well, I was married to him for 53 years. I think I know him better than anybody. Kay Summersby had wanted her book published after Mimi died, and Kay died in the meantime. She was sick. And her brother decided he was going to publish it because he wanted the money. And that's how the whole thing kind of dusted up. And yes, there are pictures of them together, but she was his driver in the war. They're going to be together, you know. So and she was also, you know, she was friendly with Daddy too. And, you know, they'd taken a show once in a while when they had a moment. But it was the three of them. It wasn't, you know, it was just anyway, comes down to, you know, when they don't have anything else, you know.
Or they're jealous.
Or they're jealous or something. Yeah. And in that case, maybe it wasn't direct extortion, but she did write the book for the money because she had to pay her hospital bills. And you know, her brother published it early because he wanted the money.
Can you imagine what it would be like today with all the
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'd,
Good point.
My family's living it.
Yeah.
We're living it.
Yeah.
And
Good point.
Every time I do, the play Give 'Em Hell Harry perpetuates the falsehood. And every time I play my grandfather, and Mary Jean is in the audience, which is, I think you're up to like 42 or 43 times now, every time she's in the front row, I have to, as the play finishes and after I take my bow, I have to step to the front of the stage and say, I'm sorry, it's not, I didn't write this. So.
well, on purpose, I was trying to be tactful and not mention any play.
I didn't write it.
Yeah,
I'm excused.
Yeah, absolutely. That was artistic license.
That's right, artistic license, yes, thank you.
But anyway, one thing that assured me that it was the truth, and it was before all this blew up, but he was considering somebody who will remain unnamed for his cabinet. And I heard him and my father talking about it, and he said, no. He said, you can't trust him, he cheats on his wife. So,
just like that.
yeah.
There you go.
So,
I'll add, and unfortunately, we know that did happen, and it did, but when it did, it was the person, I'm not going to say the name, if you'll follow her today, she will never come out and said that he made me do it, if I can put it that way.
Yeah,
And they
he
were
wasn't a
trying,
perp.
she was after his predecessor and told people she was hoping to, and that's all I'm going to say about that. There's just a lot of stuff, those in the current years, that we know or have been witness to, and I know I've talked about before, like I was in the White House when the Rose Firm records were found in a closet that had just been full and packed of stuff. When you're in a transition, especially from a governorship, a governor's mansion, or any home to the White House, it's a mess. and couldn't find it. And I was there, but I couldn't say anything for 10 years, or I would have been I would have been brought to court and lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. So, mistakes were made by some of our relatives, and maybe those that we didn't know, back in the day, but they were all good men. And they all go through a lot that we will never know about, and decisions and all, and they are also with the charisma, especially in my case and all the others and all. There are just some really weird people out there that will do anything and say anything, and it's hard to keep your mouth shut for money and all. But again, the person that it did happen, and if we're past that, and no one gets to say anything, in my opinion, about it except his wife and his daughter. And it's the social media. It's a very difficult thing, and it's when it's false, and it's not just him. It's beyond his brother and some others. So anyway, they're not perfect, but he did leave the country with a $5 billion surplus. I can't remember, but when he left office, he left the United States with a surplus. So that's what he was there to do, and take care of people. But I want to congratulate all of our presidents for what they went through personally, and how hard it is to be in the limelight, and you never know. So good for you. Okay, that was enough.
Very good, thank
For me.
you. Most of you answered the legacy question in your response to that question. So before we close, I would just like to make some remarks. Massey said that we're nothing special because we're accidents of birth, being presidential relatives, and we all certainly appreciate that. But as a historian, I've found that once you're president and first lady, you're always president and first lady. And once you're president and first lady, all of your family members share that, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we've talked about all three of those things here, the good, bad, and the ugly. And you've all share that, you all take that or not as a presidential family member. You can go incognito and pretend you're not one and never tell anybody that you are one. Or you can come out like all of you are and expand that legacy and work to tell true history and work to promote your grandfather, your great uncle, whoever, your famous relative. And I have to commend all of you for doing that. You're all you are special. You may be accidents of birth, but you are special because you are living history and you are telling the true stories, as we heard here. And as a historian, I so much appreciate that. I'm so proud to call you all my friends. And you've changed my life. You've changed the opinions of hundreds and thousands of people in your presentations. So I just ask you as a friend, keep doing what you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, give them a big hand.
May I add one quick thing that has to do with multiple presidents, and I think others in this will be. This is the Clinton Center, the Clinton Library's 20th anniversary this year. It will be in November. There is currently a case study underway by the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities with the LBJ Library, both Bush libraries, and another presidential library that I can't read my notes, I'm sorry, and the Clinton Library. It's just, how are they doing? What are your numbers? What numbers are high? What are low? How can we get more people interested? And ultimately, and it's been mentioned here today and elsewhere, not only just for the Clinton Center, but I think it's very clear with all of you and others, how can we increase civic engagement? It's critical, it matters, it's up to the presidential libraries, and thank you for what you said, but I think it's true and to us to save and preserve our democracy. People need to know who Calvin Coolidge is, who Dwight Eisenhower is, and why, and what they went through. So there's something going on. I should tell you more, but I know we're out of time, but there is a case study going on in presidential libraries, and if you haven't visited them all, like I haven't, that's one of my goals, to do it and to learn more about
Absolutely.
About
Thank you so much. Thank
A
you.
round of applause for our guest on the stage. Now, before we leave today, a couple things I would like to mention. First, thank you for another successful Cherry Blossom Festival and for all of you for participating. remember that tomorrow, you know, we started out with like 2 days, and then we went to 3 days, and now this year was 8 days total. And tomorrow we have a full day of festivities as well. If you're visiting Marshfield and you do not have a place of worship, many of our churches are having special cherry blossom services tomorrow with special guests from the festival as their speakers. So if you look me up, I'll be glad to tell you who they are. At 2 o'clock tomorrow, the Marshfield United Methodist Church will host the First Lady's Piano Concert, which of course honors our state's history, honoring the Missouri First Ladies, with 14 pianists and 1 organist all playing simultaneously. It's a free concert in the afternoon. If you've not witnessed it before, it's amazing. And then tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock at Marshfield High School's gymnasium, the College of the Ozarks Concert Band will conclude the festival with a full concert. And that is also free and open to everyone, and I hope you'll participate in those events if you're still here. It has become tradition as we conclude the festival here at the Assembly of God that we listen to Beneath the Cherry Blossom Trees, which was written by our own poet laureate, festival poet laureate, Sue Eichard, recorded by Dame Olivia de Havilland several years ago, and it's kind of our swan song to the end of this weekend. I do want you all to join me in thanking the Assembly of God for opening their doors to us again this year. This has been our festival home for many years now, and we always thank Karen Gore for running the sound and all the slideshows and all those things. And her husband Carl, who's recovering from a knee operation, but he still was faithful to go around and do all the janitorial needs. If you'll listen with me to Beneath the Cherry Blossom Trees, and then we'll come forward for our annual picture.
Trees by Sue Price Eckert. A young man returned from Washington with a dream to share of cherry trees in blossom, blooming everywhere. A place to entertain those echoes from the past. A time to gather history and traditions that would last. The people came together in this little country town, a busy little village where love and faith abound. They planted trees along with dreams of what someday would be, harvesting a bounty they could not foresee. You might recognize the name, but maybe not the face, in remembrance of all who made this world a much better place. From authors to astronomers, munchkins to musicians, we gather here together so we can learn and listen. From Lassie's pal to Barney's gal and presidential kin, they all share their stories as we remember when. Come along and take a stroll along life's memory lane and reminisce of names engraved on the Missouri Walk of Fame. Like returning robins on an April breeze, we will meet in springtime beneath the cherry blossom trees.
You guys.